I wanted to discuss one or two more things before we close up here. And we've been discussing a lot about how class and race, how race can turn into class, or rather how class turns into race and then often turns back into class. This comes out of a lot of tropes, a lot of sort of anti-black and anti-minority tropes, which is that basically they're doing it for themselves. You know, they're making their own lives worse. You know, they're more criminal, or they're more this and they're more that. And in the British experience, that comes out a lot in knife crime in London. And you know, in recent years, a lot of that has been attributed to black people and to black youths. So the idea essentially underlying it is that, as Akala says, it's their blackness which is a sufficient explanation. So let's go to Akala, and he's a rapper and a British intellectual, and see what he says about this. I think it's really worth listening to.
Book, how you analyse what's going on right now.
Yeah, well, so a lot of the research I did, when you look at scholars like Andrew Davies, who writes books about the history of gang crime in Glasgow and Manchester, or Robert McKilwee, who's got volumes of stuff about the history of gang crime in Liverpool, what you see firstly is that this is not a new problem. Every generation pretends gang crime is a new problem. So when you look at the press reports they cite in their scholarship, it's this same sort of sense of moral panic, this unprecedented thing. When actually we've had violent teenage youth gangs for 150, 200 years, maybe even longer. And the social indicators of that violence have remained identical for almost 200 years, as have the sort of facile explanations of
And those social indicators are?
Poverty, domestic abuse, lack of education, so expulsion from school. So, for example, almost half the people in prison today in Britain were expelled from school as children, versus just 1% in the population as a whole. Among young people, about half the young people in young offenders institutes were at some point in care growing up, versus about 1% in the population as a whole. So social indicators have remained identical. Explanations, or what we call moral panics, this sort of idea that just having enough police or just having tougher sentences will work. A good friend of mine, Dr. Baz Dreisinger, did a PhD looking at prisons all around the world, and she didn't find any correlation anywhere between tougher sentences and reduction of crime.
So those people who analyse it as a race problem,
yeah,
these are black gangs, these are Asian gangs, these are...
This is fascinating. I mean, let's just look at the maths. There are 1.2 million black people in London. In a bad year, 50 of them will kill someone. That's less than 0.004% of the black population. Therefore, anyone that thinks that blackness is a sufficient common denominator for violent crime clearly doesn't even understand what a common denominator is. Just to contrast, in a bad year in Glasgow, say 2005, there were 40 murders. There were only 600,000 people in Glasgow. So that year, a Glaswegian as a whole was twice as likely to be killed as a black Londoner. Whereas the commonalities, when you actually look at the demography of violent crime, the commonalities remain the same in Glasgow, Liverpool, Belfast, Naples, or London. Racial explanations are sort of way out for the powers that be, a way out for the wider society. And it's revealing that what happens in London is black on black crime, even when the person committing it is like me, has one white parent, one black parent. Okay, what happens in Glasgow, race is not important, or Liverpool, race is not important.
So let's look at the way the government is responding to this. Money, on the one hand, into very...
So, I mean, what do you make of what he's saying there?
I think he's 100% correct. Basically, race is used as a justification or as a proxy or as an easy determinant, you could say, of what is actually the problem, which is underlying socioeconomic issues. I think a lot of the socioeconomic issues that people look at are sometimes the wrong indicators as well. So people will look at things like, you know, they're not necessarily the wrong things, but they're not always the total picture. And I think that sometimes people don't actually look at the intergenerational consequences of poverty in previous generations and how, as with the redlining example we talked about earlier, it leads to social dysfunction in later generations. Yeah.
So you're saying kind of the social makeup of communities and families can be very much affected by that. And that's happened hugely in America as well, with the excessive, completely disproportionate and unjustifiable imprisonment of a lot of black males in particular, and the breakups of those families, and the drug laws that were specifically targeted to that. And by the way, the slavery basically in those prisons, which they use. And Akala, I think in a separate place, I think maybe he covers this in his book. He's got an excellent book called Natives, where he talks about this trope of single parent families, and how actually this is very much socioeconomically driven wherever you are in the world, and it's to do with kind of legislation, it's to do with, you know, economic migration and these kinds of things. So I guess this is coming back to the fact that we need to actually address the real issues here. Yes, absolutely deal with the racism, and different societies are in different, phases of dealing with these things. Some have much more of an explicit, obvious race issue, and some have much more of an issue where it's turned into class. I guess the answer will be to deal with both, but to proportionally address the issues according to where the real root of it lies, which I think.
But really, I would much rather actually that the Black Lives Matter movement, or any movement that kind of is in response to, for example, the killing of George Floyd, were to focus exclusively on the question of justice. So justice for Black people and people of color and minority communities in a systematic way. And this is why the head of the Ahmadi Muslim community, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, the Khalifa of the Ahmadi Muslim community, he's advised his community to focus, when you're talking about race, to focus on the question of justice. Because that is at the root of it. It's not about, if you're going to choose, are you going to choose between talking about, more Black kids in cartoons versus actual economic policies that would actually kind of reverse the economic injustices that Black people have historically faced, for example, due to redlining. Okay. If you were to choose between one or the other, one being a superficial thing which everybody sees and is very apparent, but actually does really nothing in terms of the underlying malaise. It does something with respect to, even a superficial thing has a superficial effect, but it doesn't actually penetrate to the underlying issues that are faced by Black people in those communities. If you had to choose between doing that or doing only an economic policy and continue to have, white kids on cartoons, I'd prefer they do the latter.
Yeah. And also
because actually the former ultimately naturally evolves out of the latter anyway. Yeah. When you start getting people who are African American, who have the same socioeconomic indicators of white individuals, well, they're going to make their own cartoons because they're now in positions of authority in media companies, etc., through a natural organic process to actually do so.
So when you're focusing on justice, you're hitting the root cause of it, and you're changing moral attitudes, which will also have a greater overspill effect in the future. If it's not just as with Black people, but also other minority communities or whatever issues there may be, you focus on people fulfilling their responsibilities to others, then I guess you'll have actually dealt with the real issue and not have made it a specific short-lived effect on one particular minority community or another. I think
100%. And that's what we in this podcast really aim to do, isn't it? We're trying to basically get to the root causes of issues. We're not here to just talk about the superficial kind of trend of the day. We want to get down to the root fundamental problems that society faces. Let's
finish now on a great video from Malcom X. Okay, so speaking about how beliefs can affect your attitudes and how your belief system can change the way that you treat other people. Malcom X is obviously one of the most famous examples of this. He started off his life, or in his early life, he was a pretty hardened criminal, so much so he's called Satan in prison, and he referred to him himself as that, and he was the most hardened atheist. He was preached to in prison, and he became a Muslim, and he quickly became a member of the Nation of Islam, and was really a separatist, someone who believed that the races should be completely separate and there was no chance for real integration in America, until he broke from the Nation of Islam and went to Hajj. And when he went to Hajj, he wrote back a famous letter, his so-called letter from Mecca. Actually sent a few of those to a few different family members. And he explains that this completely changed the way of his thinking. And when he came into contact with the most obvious manifestation in a physical way of Islam, while doing the Hajj, it really transformed his views. So this is a fantastic clip where the reporters ask him, can you comment on that letter from Mecca? And he gives some pretty funny answers to begin with, which are a little bit garbled, but I think they're quite funny, so I think we'll include them.
2 weeks ago, in regard to a letter that you wrote from Mecca.
Yeah, what do you want me to comment? I mean, ask me a question about it and I'll try and answer, but comment, that's a long letter.
He's saying, I wrote the letter, just read the letter. I mean, what do you want to say?
The entire letter. But it said that you had changed your views towards your hard racial line.
Travel broadens one's scope. Anytime you do any traveling, your scope will be broadened. It doesn't mean you change, you broaden.
I think they recognize that as a little bit of a dodge. But
no religion will ever make me forget the condition of our people in this country. No religion will ever make me forget the continued biting of dogs against our people in this country. No religion will make me forget the police clubs that come upside our heads. No God or no religion, no nothing will make me forget it until it's stopped, until it's finished, until it's eliminated. I want to make that point clear. Now, concerning the letter, in Mecca, during this religious Hajj, it would be an anthropologist's paradise, because never at any time or any place can you find a wider variety of specimens from the human family together at the same time than during this pilgrimage. Every type of human being imaginable is there. All colors, all sizes, all everything. As I pointed out in the letter, during the religious ritual, you eat actually with your hands all of the time. I was eating from the same plate with people who in America would be considered white, whose hair was blonde, whose eyes were blue, and whose skin was white. Yes. There were black people, brown people, red people, yellow people, and white people. Every specimen of humanity was represented there. But one thing I noticed about these, they didn't act white. They didn't act like the white people whom I had always known. In studying it, and any Afro-American who's involved in any kind of experience, the yardstick that he uses to measure it is racism. When you find a black man, a so-called Negro from America, any situation he comes in contact with, he's measuring it from the racist point of view, because this is his experience. This is the American experience for a black American, so-called black American, or a black so-called American.
I want to actually just comment on that, because in reading his autobiography, there's a part of it which is very striking, which is one of the Nation of Islam's, one of their doctrines was that the white man is the devil. Like literally white people are devils and they're the spawn of Satan. And he was in prison and he was told this. And he talks about how he went in his mind through every white person that he'd ever have contact with. And he went back to his father and the people who lynched his father and abused him. And then the police who separated his family, and the social services that took away his mum, and she eventually got sectioned.
Wow, really?
Into a mental health institute because she got under so much stress.
Wow, he had no chance, did he?
Yeah, and then he went into the big city and and then he knew that he had no real chance to do anything in society, so he basically became a criminal. And they were always his enemies in various different ways. And it shows actually the effect that kind of hate can breed.
What did he say? He said, I went back and I thought about all of them.
He said, I thought about them. He was like, yeah, well, they must be the devil. Because his experience was so thorough of racism growing up from the 1930s onwards. It's unreal how that idea, and he's not like an idiot, he's an incredibly smart man.
Yeah, nobody can frankly hold, very few human beings in human history are able to hold a candle to Malcolm X when it comes to ideas, intelligence, and oratory.
Yeah. So it's a stark example of how bad that racism was, and obviously parts of it certainly linger on today. But I thought I'd just come in on that. Let's get back to Brother Malcolm. This is a great joke, which I just butchered. So.
He's measuring it from the racist point of view, because this is his experience. This is the American experience for a black American, so-called black American, or a black so-called American. So I was studying the situation, and I was asking myself, well, what is the difference between these people and those whom I just left in America? Something is different. And it was their attitude. It wasn't their color, because those were just as white as these. Their eyes were just as blue as these. Their hair was just as blonde as these. Yet they were different. And the difference was not in the color, but in the attitude. So I was searching to find an answer as to why, and I thought I did. The fact that they had accepted the oneness of God, as does everyone who's on that pilgrimage, had the chain reaction effect of forcing them also to accept the oneness of the human family. So that by accepting the oneness of God, they regarded all people, all persons, as part of the human family. They didn't judge them by the color of their skin, but the different complexions present only represented the different complexions that go to make up the human family. Not one being any better than the other, or one being any different from the other. And this was reflected in their attitude, because they looked upon all of mankind as a brother. They looked upon themselves as being nothing but another brother. They didn't have that air, I am white. White to them didn't mean the same thing that it means in America. When a man in America says he's white, he means something much different from what is meant by that man over there. When this man over here uses the word white, right in the sound of his voice, right in the essence of his being, is something that you and I are able to detect, and I think you'll have to bear me witness. Over there I didn't find that. So I said to myself, and I wrote it back, that if Islam, if that philosophy can remove from those people who are supposedly white this ingredient of racism that we have always discovered and felt the results of in this society, if it can remove it from that, perhaps if these people over here with the blue eyes and the blonde hair and the white skin and the bad attitude can study that philosophy and be affected by it in the same manner, perhaps they too can be saved from the disaster that they must inevitably run into if they continue to practice or display the same racist attitude that we see reflected. Now, if this is a change in my original attitude, then let it be. But I'd rather say that travel broadens one's scope.
So that's pretty brilliant. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it actually made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up.
Yeah.
Like, it actually made the hairs on my back of my neck stand up. I mean, there are two things that really I really like out of that. Three things, actually. I better say them quickly, otherwise I'm going to forget what they are.
There are 9 things that really stand out to me.
So the first thing is that he changed his mind.
Yeah.
Okay. The first thing is that he changed his mind about white people. And that is a testament to his own genuine integrity and his own sincerity and commitment to the issues that he was facing, and his genuine interest not to, he wasn't there to make a name for himself. He was actually trying to create and discover a solution for the issue and the race problems in America. And this is why I believe God guided him to Islam. Because in Islam, towards the end of his life, as evidenced by that clip there, he found the true solution. The true solution is in changing people's mentality and their beliefs that underpin their mentality. And no amount of legislation can change people's fundamental beliefs and mentality. That requires social change.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is
Can I come in on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because also, he doesn't talk about in that clip, but in many other places, he talks about how Islam in its totality, and he talks about social teachings and its economic teachings, will fix the problem. So he actually talked about how all the different aspects of Islam will also do that. So as well as the fundamental changing of attitudes, which is obviously the basis and the premise of all of it, he did speak. He had a very encompassing point of view. And he was very well attuned to how class is part of it and how we need all these different approaches and how Islam caters for all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, legislation is 100% part of the story. You must have legislation to at least safeguard people's rights, because that's how rights are safeguarded. And the civil rights movement is one of the great success stories in the 20th century. There's no doubt about that. But it's an incomplete story because when you change people's beliefs and mentality, the legislation naturally follows.
Yeah.
Right? But when you change legislation, beliefs and mentality don't naturally follow. And we're in a situation in America where there's a lot of people who you have legislation in place, but their beliefs and their mentality has not been reformed. And so that's the point I was trying to make.
And that comes out in their prison laws and their crime laws, and the way that you have just modern slavery in their prisons as well. But sorry, so your second point?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the second point is that, there's some going to actually the root of Islam, which is the practice of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. There are two examples where the Prophet Muhammad, how he changed people's mentality. How did he take Arabs who thought of themselves as superior to pretty much everybody, on account of their more advanced language, which is still the case. They've still got the most advanced language in the world. How did he change their mentality, which was highly tribal, who, they thought that even an Arab from another tribe was less than them, let alone a black Abyssinian, for example. And there was Bilal, the black Abyssinian, who was previously a slave within Muslim society. And when he became a Muslim and he was freed, first of all, by Abu Bakr. He became a Muslim while he was yet a slave. And then he was tortured by the Meccan pagans to turn him away from the belief in Islam. And he persisted in his belief that God was one and that Muhammad, peace be on him, was the messenger of God. And when Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph of Islam, he bought him and he freed him immediately. So he bought him for the purpose of freeing him. And it's really interesting that Bilal, what did the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, do with Bilal? He did two particular things of noteworthy significance. The first is that he made him the caller to the prayer. Okay, so when the call to prayer first happened, and throughout the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, Bilal, peace be on him, was the person who would call people to prayer. He was the one who was saying, come to prayer, come to prayer, come to success, come to success. Okay, so that was one way he changed the mentality of the Arabs, that they would hear every single day in the tune and in the accent of an Abyssinian. They would hear Arabic being spoken, saying, come to prayer, come to success. The second really major way in which he demonstrated that was on the day of the fall of Mecca, right? When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, conquered Mecca bloodlessly, without any bloodshed, with 10,000 soldiers. He said, and he made an announcement to be made in Mecca, in which anybody who enters the precincts of the Kaaba, the black square at the center of Mecca, anyone who enters the precincts of the Kaaba, anyone who stays in their homes or in the home of Abu Sufyan will be safe. Abu Sufyan was the chief of Mecca at the time. And the third way of being safe, anybody who takes refuge under the banner of Bilal. So Bilal was sent into the city with a banner. Okay, and he was holding the banner. So anybody who would take refuge under Bilal would be safe. I mean, that is such an extraordinary symbolic act.
Talk about representation.
Yeah, that's true. Representation does matter. But he used it to change people's mentality in a really big way. And the third thing I just wanted to point out was a very small point Malcolm X said at the end of that video. He said that the race issue is going to become a disaster for the United States unless they change their ways. And he was 100% right.
Well, I think it's been a great discussion, so thank you for that. I think we'll wrap it up there. Did you have anything else you wanted to come in on?
No. What about you?
No, I'm good, thanks. I think we've covered a lot. So we've talked about in the last episode the geopolitics of the day, and today we've talked a lot about cultural issues that we're facing and how that ties into the economic issues. But we have a lot more to cover in future episodes. So make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell. Give us a like, give us a comment, and also we're on a few different podcast platforms that we'll put in the link to the description below. And we'll put all the links that we used as well into the description below. So until next time, thank you very much for tuning into the Rational Religion Show. Tell your friends about us, and peace be upon you.
Peace be on you.